AITA for letting my husband take all the assets along with every debt in our divorce? I'm Nora, 38, and at that point I had been Garrett's wife for 14 years and Milo's mom for 8. Most of my evenings were ordinary in the way that only a tired parent's life can be. Spelling words at the kitchen counter, peanut butter stuck in the corner of a lunchbox, a damp towel abandoned on the bathroom floor, and 3 reminders to Garrett that school pickup was not an optional bonding opportunity. It was a responsibility with a time and an address. For years, I thought staying calm was the same as keeping our home stable. I didn't want Milo growing up in a house where every missed appointment became a shouting match. So when Garrett forgot things, I fixed them. When he spent money without discussing it, I moved our finances around. When he promised to take Milo to an appointment and then texted me 20 minutes before it started that something had come up, I left whatever I was doing and handled it. Garrett liked the parts of fatherhood that came with an audience. He posted pictures from Milo's soccer games, even when he arrived during the last 10 minutes. He told relatives that he was teaching Milo discipline, because he made him clean up his toys once at Beverly's house. At Sunday dinners, he talked about providing for his family in a tone that made it sound as if I had spent 14 years sitting in a chair while groceries and medical forms floated into the house on their own. The repetitive work didn't interest him. Parent-teacher emails went unread, unless I forwarded them with the important sentence copied into a text. School pickups became a debate about whose schedule was more flexible. Milo had started seeing a counselor for anxiety after a rough school year, and Garrett missed the first 2 appointments because he said he had put them in the wrong calendar. The second time I stood in the kitchen holding my phone and said, "There is one family calendar. The same one we've used for 3 years. Garrett leaned against the counter and sighed. "You always make me sound useless. I'm asking you to show up at pickup, not confess to a crime." That became our pattern. I asked for a concrete action. He answered as if I had attacked his character. Then Beverly would tell me that Garrett was trying in his own way, and Alana would make a comment about how I liked controlling everything. Beverly specialized in making criticism sound like concern. She never called me selfish directly. She would lower her voice and say things like, "A good wife has to know when keeping score does more damage than the mistake." Howard, Garrett's father, usually studied his plate when she did it. Alana smiled into her drink. The dinner where Garrett announced the divorce happened on a Sunday. Beverly had made roast chicken, and Milo was in the den with a cousin watching a movie. Garrett had been unusually attentive all afternoon. He refilled water glasses. He asked Howard about his knee. He even carried dishes into the kitchen without being asked. I should have known he was performing. Dessert had just been served when he cleared his throat. "I think we need to talk about what happens next," he said. Beverly set down her fork with an expression that looked surprised until I noticed she wasn't looking at Garrett. She was looking at me. Alana already had her phone face down beside her plate. Howard's shoulders sank. Garrett reached into a leather folder near his chair and pulled out a packet thick enough to require a binder clip. He placed it in front of me. "I filed," he said. "I don't want this to turn ugly. I put together something fair." For a few seconds, all I could hear was the movie playing in the next room and the soft scrape of Howard's thumb against the edge of his napkin. I looked at the first page. It was a proposed settlement, not a court order, but it had been prepared before dinner. Garrett wanted the house, the newer SUV, most of the furniture he considered valuable, the joint savings account, and several specific items he had purchased over the years. He described all of it as necessary for continuity and stability. I would have primary responsibility for Milo during the school week. Garrett leaned back. "You can keep the child routine. I'm taking the assets." He said it casually, as if he were dividing a garage. I didn't ask why he wanted a divorce. By then, the answer mattered less than the fact that he had chosen to announce it in front of witnesses with paperwork already printed. I asked, "What custody schedule are you requesting?" His face tightened slightly. It wasn't the reaction he had expected. "We'll work that out," he said. "You included 12 pages about property. What schedule do you want with Milo?" Beverly gave me a small wounded look. "Nora, Garrett is trying to do this peacefully. Think about what Milo needs." "That's what I'm asking about. Which nights is Garrett taking him?" Garrett looked toward the den, then back at me. Come on, Nora. You know he does better with you during school weeks. He needs consistency. And weekends. Alternating. Maybe more when things settle down. Alana folded her arms. So he's offering you exactly what you always said you wanted, and you're still looking for a problem. I turned another page. The language around the house was strangely clean when it described ownership and strangely vague when it mentioned debt. The SUV was identified by year, model, and vehicle number, but the loan balance wasn't listed. The joint account was named, but there was no attached statement. Garrett said, "You can start over more easily than I can. Milo needs to see that his dad still has a stable home." That was when I understood the basic plan. He wanted the visible pieces of our life. I would keep the daily work. He would keep the house people recognized, the nicer vehicle, and the story that he had sacrificed time with his son because he was generous enough to let Milo stay with me. Beverly reached for my hand. I moved it to turn another page. "A mother should know when peace matters more than pride," she said softly. "This family doesn't need a war." I closed the packet. "I'm not signing anything tonight." Garrett's jaw shifted. "No one asked you to sign tonight." "Good. Then we're done discussing it here." I stood, walked into the den, and told Milo it was time to go. He complained because the movie had 20 minutes left. I helped him find one shoe under the coffee table, while Beverly followed me into the hallway. "Please don't make Garrett beg for dignity," she whispered. I zipped Milo's jacket and said, "He brought a divorce settlement to dinner. I don't think dignity is what he's short on." At home, Milo fell asleep with his backpack half unpacked on the floor beside his bed. I found a spelling worksheet folded under a library book and put it on the kitchen counter. Then I sat down with Garrett's proposal spread out beside it. That image stayed with me. One stack of paper describing Garrett's claim to our property and one sheet covered in Milo's uneven handwriting. Garrett had spent more time specifying which television he wanted than he had spent specifying when he planned to parent his son. I read every page twice. The more I read, the less emotional I felt. Not because I wasn't hurt. I was. 14 years had been reduced to a planned announcement over roast chicken. But Garrett had made one mistake before the divorce had even started. He had assumed I would be so humiliated that I would either explode or sign just to get out of the room. Instead, I noticed the omissions. The next morning, I made copies of the proposal, changed the passwords on my personal accounts, and called an attorney whose name I had been given months earlier by a parent I knew through school. I had saved the number without admitting to myself why. Vivian was 52, direct, and unimpressed by drama. She read the proposal in silence while I sat across from her, trying not to twist a paper tissue into pieces. When she reached the property section, she looked up. "He wants the house." "Yes." "And the newer vehicle." "Yes." "And he wants you to take most school nights." "He calls it keeping Milo's routine." Vivian made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Custody isn't measured by speeches. It's measured by overnights." She told me not to agree to anything, not to move joint money except for ordinary expenses, and not to communicate about settlement terms unless it was in writing or through our lawyers. Then she began listing reasons I should fight for my share of the house. I let her finish. "What happens if I don't want it?" I asked. "The house." "The house, the SUV, any of the things he listed. What happens if he takes them and also takes everything attached to them?" Vivian leaned back. "Do you know something about the debt?" "Not yet. I know he left it vague. Garrett is never vague when the numbers help him." She studied me for a moment. "Most people come in here ready to fight over the house. I want to know what happens if the house fights back." That was the first time she smiled. She told me we needed complete financial disclosure before deciding anything. We requested mortgage records, account statements, loan payoffs, tax documents, credit reports allowed through the discovery process, and records of transfers from joint funds. We also began building an accurate history of Milo's care. I didn't create that history from memory. I used records. There were emails from the school office asking if someone was coming because Garrett had missed pickup. There were texts where he wrote, "Can you just handle tonight?" And, "I'm not getting stuck with school nights every week." There were appointment reminders showing that I had attended Milo's counseling sessions and medical visits. There were receipts for copays, school supplies, activity fees, prescriptions, and the pair of glasses Garrett had insisted were probably optional, until the optometrist explained that Milo couldn't read the board clearly. I saved everything into dated folders. Vivian's assistant gave me a simple spreadsheet for overnights, pickups, canceled visits, and expenses. I hated filling it out. It made my marriage look like a case file. But after Garrett had turned our family into a public performance, facts felt cleaner than arguments. Garrett noticed the change quickly. Before, when he failed to show up, I sent 3 texts and then called. After hiring Vivian, I sent 1 message. Pickup is at 3:10. Please confirm by noon. If he didn't confirm, I made other arrangements and recorded it. At the first school exchange after he learned I had a lawyer, he waited beside my car while Milo buckled his seatbelt. "You're embarrassing me," he said under his breath. I checked that Milo's door was closed. "How?" "Using attorneys for every little thing. We could settle this like adults if you'd stop being bitter. Put the schedule in writing." "There you go again. Everything has to be documented with you now." "Yes." He stared at me, waiting for more. When I didn't provide it, he said, "You're making me look bad. I'm making you put things in writing." I got into the car and left. 2 days later, he texted, "Stop trying to turn me into a weekday babysitter. Milo has a mother." I forwarded it to Vivian. Her response was 1 sentence. "Don't answer that." Beverly called repeatedly during those first weeks. I let most calls go to voicemail. She left messages about family unity, grace, and how hard this was on Garrett. One evening, after I had asked through our attorneys for a specific proposed parenting schedule, she left the message that changed the entire custody conversation. Her tone was calm, almost soothing. "Nora, you have Milo. Be grateful for that. Let Garrett keep the nice things so he doesn't feel like his whole life was taken from him. You know he's not built for school night custody. He gets overwhelmed by all the schedules. And Milo is easier with you anyway. That doesn't mean people need to think you kept his son from him. Just let him have his dignity." I replayed it twice because I couldn't believe how neatly she had stated the plan. Garrett wasn't supposed to become a father who handled school mornings, homework, counseling appointments, or sick days. He was supposed to look like a father who had been denied those things. The next morning, I played the voicemail for Vivian. She listened without interrupting, then checked the timestamp. "Save the original file and make 2 backups," she said. She just said the quiet part out loud. The financial records arrived more slowly. At first, they looked ordinary. Mortgage statements, vehicle loan papers, credit card summaries. Then the details began to line up. The house did have equity, but far less than Garrett had implied at dinner. There was a second loan tied to it that I had never seen in our regular household file. Garrett had opened the line of credit during a period when he told me we were using savings for repairs and family expenses. The balance was high, and several payments had been late. Fees had accumulated. The main mortgage had also fallen behind twice before Garrett shifted money into it at the last moment. The SUV he wanted was worth substantially less than the loan payoff. Garrett had rolled part of an earlier vehicle balance into the current loan, then added an extended warranty and other finance costs. The monthly payment I had complained about wasn't simply high. The vehicle was deeply underwater. There were also transfers from our joint account to Alana. Not one emergency payment, but a series of them. Some were labeled family help. Others had vague notes like reimbursement, or no note at all. Together, they totaled enough to matter. When Vivian requested an explanation, Garrett claimed he had been helping his sister through a difficult period, and that I had known about it. I had known about one payment. I had not known about the others. Alana had spent months calling me greedy while benefiting from money Garrett moved without telling me. There were smaller surprises too. Unpaid maintenance bills, store financing connected to furniture Garrett insisted on keeping, and taxes that would come due because he had sold investments from a joint account without setting aside enough for the tax bill. None of these things would have destroyed us individually. Together, they showed a consistent habit. Garrett liked buying the visible part and postponing the consequences. I sat in Vivian's office with a stack of payoff statements between us. "He doesn't want assets," I said. He wants decorations with debt taped to the bottom. Vivian tapped the house statement. There is still value here if the market holds and the loans are managed correctly. I need you to understand that. Walking away from an ownership interest can be expensive. I understand. You are entitled to fight for a share. I don't want to give him a gift. I want Milo protected, my finances separated, and the record to show what Garrett actually chose. Can we structure it so he gets the assets only if he takes every obligation and refinances me off the debt? Yes, but we do it carefully. He assumes the loans, fees, taxes, maintenance, and any debt attributable to the property. He indemnifies you. He refinances by a hard deadline. If he can't, the property is sold. No vague promises. And the car? Same principle. Title, loan, negative equity, insurance, maintenance. If he wants the asset, we attach the liability. What about the money sent to Alana? We ask for an equalization credit. The court doesn't need to punish his sister. It needs to account for marital funds he transferred without your agreement. And Milo. Vivian pulled the parenting spreadsheet closer. We build the schedule around demonstrated availability, not his public claims. That part mattered more to me than the house. Garrett initially demanded joint legal custody and language describing us as equal parents, which was reasonable in theory. Then he also demanded that Milo sleep at my home every Sunday through Thursday during the school year. He wanted alternating weekends, some holidays, and flexibility whenever he had plans. He wanted the title without the calendar. Vivian's proposed parenting plan was specific. Garrett would have alternating weekends from Friday after school until Sunday evening, one midweek dinner, a defined holiday rotation, scheduled summertime, and equal access to school and medical information. Child support would be calculated using actual overnights and our verified financial information. Medical expenses would be shared by a fixed percentage. Miss time wouldn't automatically create a right to take Milo without notice on another day. All schedule changes would go through a shared parenting calendar. The plan also protected Milo's separate savings account. Garrett had referred to it once as family money, even though most of it came from birthday gifts, small deposits I made, and contributions from both sets of grandparents. The settlement required both parents to receive statements, and neither of us could withdraw funds except for Milo's documented benefit or by written agreement. Garrett hated the level of detail. He called me after receiving the first counterproposal. "What is this?" he demanded. "A settlement proposal. You gave me the house and then filled 3 pages with ways to punish me for taking it. Those pages describe the loans attached to it. We both benefited from that house. Then stop calling the debt a punishment. You're trying to bury me in technical language. Your attorney can explain it." He was quiet for a moment. "You always do this. You make everything complicated so you can control it." "No. You wanted the title. The debt came with it." He hung up. After that, most communication went through our lawyers. Garrett's attorney wasn't foolish, and he wasn't part of the family performance. He asked for appraisals, updated payoff figures, and revisions. Several times, he advised Garrett to consider selling the house and dividing the net proceeds instead of insisting on keeping it. Garrett refused. The house was central to his story. He had already told relatives that he was preserving Milo's family home, while I was choosing to leave. He couldn't easily admit that the home had less value than he had claimed, or that keeping it required him to carry 2 loans and refinance under his income alone. He also refused to give up the SUV. It was the vehicle people associated with him. He had spent years describing it as proof that he took care of his family. Trading it for something cheaper would have looked to him like losing. Meanwhile, his public version of the divorce spread. I received messages from relatives I rarely spoke to asking if it was true that I was taking Milo and forcing Garrett out. Someone told Irene, a relative on Garrett's side who had always been fair to me, that I was demanding the house, full custody, and support high enough to leave Garrett with nothing. Irene called me directly. "I don't like gossip," she said. "So I'm asking you, are you trying to keep Milo from his father?" "No. I asked Garrett to propose school night custody. He declined." "He told people you refused 50/50ths. Ask him which nights he requested. There was a pause. That is a very specific answer. It was a very specific question. I didn't send her documents. I didn't play Beverly's voicemail. I simply told her that the parenting plan would reflect the schedule Garrett was willing to perform. Irene thanked me and ended the call. Alana was less interested in facts. She texted me, "Funny how you only care about fairness when money is involved." I didn't reply. 2 days later she sent, "Enjoy starting over with bills and bedtime stories." I saved it in the same folder as the transfer records. Beverly left another voicemail telling me that a mother shouldn't humiliate her child's father. Garrett sent a message saying, "My family sees exactly what you're doing." I kept thinking about how much energy they spent describing me as emotional while trying desperately to provoke an emotional response. The negotiations continued for several months. There was nothing dramatic about most of it. Documents went back and forth. Payoff figures changed. Appraisals were completed. We argued about the value of furniture, and then decided the argument wasn't worth the attorney fees. We listed holiday weekends. We defined how much notice was required for schedule changes. We added language stating that neither parent would disparage the other in Milo's presence. Garrett tried to claim more overnights on paper than he intended to use because more overnights could reduce his support payment. Vivian responded with the calendar, his emails, and his own text saying he wasn't going to be a weekday babysitter. His attorney stopped making that argument. Then Beverly's voicemail became part of the settlement discussion. We didn't use it to demand that Garrett lose his parenting rights. I didn't want that. Milo loved his father, and Garrett was capable of being attentive in shorter, defined periods. The voicemail was used for what it proved. The claim that I had pressured Garrett out of school night custody was false. When Garrett accused me of manipulating the schedule, Vivian read his proposed overnights back to him and asked if he wanted to add Monday through Thursday responsibilities. He said his schedule didn't allow it. That ended the performance more effectively than any speech could have. A week before mediation, Vivian sent over the near-final agreement. It gave Garrett the house, subject to a refinance deadline and complete assumption of the first mortgage, second loan, arrearages, fees, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and any other debt secured by the property. If he failed to refinance and remove my liability by the deadline, the house would be listed for sale under a clearly defined process. He would receive the SUV and assume the entire loan, including the negative equity and related costs. He would keep the furniture and electronics he had specifically named, along with any outstanding financing tied to them. The transfers to Alana would be counted against his share of the marital estate through an equalization adjustment. The joint investment account would be divided after accounting for the tax obligation created by his withdrawals. I would keep my individual retirement account, my personal vehicle with its smaller loan, the emergency fund we had finally identified, and the items I actually used. Milo's account would be protected. Child support would follow the guideline calculation based on actual custody time. Medical and counseling expenses would be shared. The parenting schedule would be enforceable and specific. It wasn't a fantasy outcome where I took everything and Garrett was left on the sidewalk. It was a separation of choices. Garrett got what he had insisted represented success. I got removed from the financial consequences of those choices and a parenting plan based on reality. His attorney requested changes to the refinance timeline and some wording around repairs. Vivian negotiated those points. I agreed to a slightly longer deadline because a forced sale during the school year would have created more chaos. In exchange, we added automatic listing language if he missed the new deadline. No more extensions without a written agreement. By then, Garrett had convinced himself that my willingness to let him keep the house meant I had surrendered. He told relatives I had finally come to my senses. Beverly sent me a message saying, "I'm glad you decided to leave with dignity. This will be better for Milo." Alana wrote, "Guess you figured out fighting us was expensive." I didn't answer either of them. The mediation took place in a conference suite near the courthouse. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom. There was a long table, a pitcher of water, legal pads, and a mediator who had probably heard every version of "This is about the children" ever spoken by people arguing over furniture. Garrett arrived in a suit and looked relaxed. Beverly wasn't allowed in the mediation room, but she had driven him and waited nearby. Alana had sent him a message that he read in the hallway, laughing before we went inside. Vivian placed our document binder in front of her. I had a single page of notes and a photograph of Milo on my phone. I looked at it once before turning the phone face down. The mediator began with custody. She asked each of us to confirm the schedule. Garrett said, "I want to be clear that I never agreed with Nora keeping Milo most of the time." The mediator looked at the calendar. "The proposal gives you alternating weekends, a midweek dinner, holiday time and 4 summer weeks. Are you requesting additional school night overnights?" Garrett shifted in his chair. "Not with my current schedule. But I don't want it written like I'm choosing less time." Vivian said, "The agreement describes the time, not his motive." The mediator waited. Garrett's attorney quietly said, "The schedule reflects what you instructed us to request." Garrett frowned but didn't change it. Then we moved through support, medical expenses, the shared calendar, holiday exchanges, and Milo's account. Each item was confirmed. There were no surprises. Garrett had received every draft. His attorney had explained the terms. He simply disliked hearing them described together, because the complete picture didn't match the story he had been telling. The property section came last. The mediator read the house provision. Garrett would receive my ownership interest after refinancing. He would assume the first mortgage, the second loan, all arrearages and late fees, taxes, insurance, required maintenance, and any debt secured by the property. He would indemnify me against all claims and provide proof of timely payments until the refinancing was complete. If the refinance didn't occur by the deadline, the house would be listed for sale. Garrett tapped his pen. The mediator read the updated balances from the attached payoff statements. His attorney's expression changed. Not because the numbers were new, but because hearing the first mortgage, second loan, arrearages, fees, and refinance obligation in one sequence made the burden impossible to reduce to "I get the house." Garrett interrupted. "The house has equity. The appraisal and payoff statements are attached," the mediator said. "Your attorney can review the net estimate with you again." His attorney leaned closer and spoke quietly. Garrett shook his head. "Keep going," he said. The SUV provision came next. He would receive the vehicle and assume the full loan. The payoff balance was read, as was the appraised value. Garrett looked at me for the first time since we had entered the room. "You knew it was underwater," he said. "The statement was produced weeks ago," Vivian replied before I could speak. The mediator continued. "The equalization credit for the undisclosed transfers was stated. The tax obligation associated with the investment withdrawals was allocated. The financed furniture was assigned with the remaining balances. Child support was confirmed using the actual overnight schedule." Garrett pushed back from the table. "This is not what I agreed to." His attorney opened the draft and pointed to the signed acknowledgement of the negotiated terms. "These provisions have been in every final draft. I advised you about the refinance requirement and the vehicle balance. She tricked me by acting like she was giving me everything. I had promised myself I wouldn't give a speech. I didn't. I said no. You wrote the wish list. I just made sure you got the receipt." The room went quiet. Garrett stared at me with an expression I had seen many times during our marriage. It was the look he used when a bill arrived for something he had already enjoyed. The mediator asked if he needed time to consult privately with his attorney. He did. They left the room for almost 40 minutes. Vivian didn't celebrate. She reviewed the parenting provisions again and asked if I was still comfortable with the schedule. "Yes," I said. "As long as it's real." When Garrett returned, he looked furious but controlled. His attorney spoke first. Garrett had 3 practical choices. He could accept the agreement, continue litigating at a considerable cost with no guarantee of receiving the house or vehicle, or negotiate a sale and division instead. The appraisal, debt statements, transfer records, and custody history would still exist in any contested case. Garrett asked for one more modification to the refinance timeline. We agreed to a modest change and tightened the automatic sale language. Then he signed. I signed after Vivian reviewed each signature page with me. A notary completed the acknowledgments. The mediator read the final key terms aloud once more, and asked each of us if we understood them. Garrett said yes without looking at me. The agreement was later entered as part of the divorce order. There was no judge gasping, no courtroom applause, and no hidden clause revealed at the last second. The documents worked because everything had been disclosed, attached, explained, and signed. Garrett had simply expected the consequences to feel different when they became his alone. Outside the conference suite, Beverly stood as soon as she saw him. She smiled at first. "Is it done?" Garrett walked past her. She looked at me. "What did you do?" "We settled." He looks devastated. Then ask him to explain the agreement. Alana called me that night. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail accusing me of setting a trap and saying Garrett had only taken the house because he believed it was best for Milo. That claim lasted less than a week. At Howard's birthday barbecue, Garrett told several relatives that I had hidden debt inside the settlement. Milo was outside playing with his cousins, far enough away that the adults couldn't use him as an audience. I had gone because Milo wanted to see his grandfather, and I planned to stay only long enough for cake. Irene was in the kitchen when Garrett said, "She made it look like she was giving me the assets, but every page had another obligation." Irene set down the serving spoon in her hand. "Did she force you to ask for those things?" she said. Garrett looked at her. "That's not the point." "It seems like the point. Did she force you to demand the house and the car? Or did you not read what came with them?" Beverly stepped in. "This is exactly the kind of division Nora has created." Garrett was trying to preserve something for his son. I said, "He declined school nights." "Because you made it impossible," Beverly said. "I have your voicemail." Her face changed. Alana, who had been leaning against the counter, stopped moving. I continued, "The one where you said Garrett wasn't built for school night custody and should keep the nice things so people wouldn't think I took Milo from him." Howard looked at Beverly. "You said that." Beverly lowered her voice. "I was trying to prevent a war." "You were trying to control the story," Irene said. Garrett turned to me. "You played my mother's private message for people?" "I played it for my attorney. I'm telling you now that any future communication about Milo will be respectful and in writing. You don't get to pressure me privately and perform concern publicly anymore." Alana finally spoke. "You're enjoying this." I looked at her. "The transfers to you were counted in the settlement." She went pale. Howard's head turned toward her. "What transfers?" he asked. Alana looked at Garrett instead of answering. That was the moment Howard stopped studying the floor. "How much?" he asked Garrett. Garrett said it was family business. Howard replied, "You made it family business when you told everyone Nora was taking everything from you." I didn't stay for the argument that followed. I found Milo, helped him wrap a piece of cake in foil and left. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They settled in through deadlines. Garrett made the house payments for several months, but refinancing was harder than he had predicted. The second loan, the vehicle debt, and his other obligations affected what he qualified for. He asked for an extension. The agreement required any extension to be written and voluntary. Vivian advised me that another delay would keep my credit exposed. I declined. The house was listed under the automatic sale provision. After the loans, fees, and sale costs were paid, the remaining amount was much smaller than Garrett had told relatives it would be. He didn't lose every dollar, but the house wasn't the trophy he had presented at dinner. He eventually sold the SUV and had to cover the deficiency. For a while, he drove an older vehicle he borrowed from Howard. Alana stopped sending messages after Howard learned how much money had been transferred to her. From what I heard, he told both of his children that he was done financing their secrets and then being expected to defend them. Beverly tried several times to restart private conversations. She sent long messages about forgiveness and the importance of grandparents. I didn't block her because she was still part of Milo's life, but I only answered when the message was about him. "Pickup is at 5 o'clock. His inhaler is in the front pocket of the bag. Please add the schedule request to the shared calendar." When she added a comment about my attitude, I ignored it. Garrett also tested the parenting plan. The first month, he asked to switch 3 weekends with less than a day's notice. I agreed once because Milo had been looking forward to an event with him. The second time, I directed him to the calendar. The third time, he accused me of being inflexible. I replied, "Consistency isn't punishment." He used most of his scheduled weekends after that. Not all, but enough that Milo had a relationship with him based on actual time instead of photographs. The midweek dinners were less reliable. When Garrett missed one, I didn't tell Milo that his father had failed him. I said the plan had changed, made dinner, and documented the cancellation. Child support was transferred under the order. Garrett complained that the amount treated him like a visitor. Vivian reminded his attorney that he could request more parenting time if he was prepared to take more responsibility. He never filed to add school nights. Milo's life became quieter. We kept a calendar on the refrigerator. His school forms were signed on time. Counseling appointments stopped being bargaining chips. He knew which weekends were with Garrett and which were with me. He no longer listened from the hallway, while adults used cheerful voices that didn't match their faces. One Friday evening, a few months after the house was listed, Milo sat at the kitchen counter working on a math sheet. He looked up and asked, "Are we still doing Pancakes Saturday?" "Always," I said. He nodded and went back to his work. That small exchange meant more to me than any property award could have. I won't pretend I felt nothing when Garrett's version of victory collapsed. A part of me did enjoy watching him explain the debts he had hidden and the custody he had refused. I enjoyed seeing Irene ask the question everyone else had avoided. I enjoyed the moment Howard finally demanded an answer instead of letting silence protect his son. But I didn't invent the debts. I didn't forge the messages. I didn't keep Milo from Garrett or inflate the support calculation. I didn't hide the terms in language his attorney couldn't understand. Every obligation was disclosed. Every number was attached. Every draft was reviewed. What I stopped doing was rescuing Garrett from the consequences of choices he made for appearance. For 14 years I had covered missed pickups, shifted money, softened explanations, and absorbed embarrassment because I believed peace required one person to keep swallowing the conflict. The divorce taught me that silence doesn't always create peace. Sometimes it simply gives the loudest person room to write the story. So I stopped arguing about the story and started preserving the record. Garrett wanted the house because people could see it. He wanted the SUV because people admired it. He wanted the language of equal fatherhood without the school night calendar. Beverly wanted him to look abandoned without having to watch him struggle through the responsibilities he rejected. Alana wanted to call me greedy without admitting she had benefited from money moved behind my back. They were all angry when the paperwork forced those priorities into the open. I walked away without the house and without the vehicle Garrett had treated like proof of success. I also walked away without his second loan, his negative equity, his late fees, his undisclosed transfers, and his ability to rewrite our parenting arrangement depending on who was listening. I kept a stable routine for Milo, a clear financial boundary, and a record that couldn't be softened over dinner. He wanted the things. I wanted our son safe. By the end, the court made both of us live with what we chose. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.